In this edition of Behind the Disney Classics, we'll be focusing on the fourth feature in the Walt Disney Animation Classics canon, and the smallest yet most successful feature to come out of the Disney Golden Age. Released in 1941, it is of course, Dumbo. By late 1940, Walt Disney had already released 3 feature films, each bigger in scale, grander in size, and even more ambitious and more groundbreaking than the last. Sparing no cost whatsoever, the Walt Disney Studios changed the face of animation, developing and inventing techniques and styles necessary to make the pictures they so desired. However, with the outbreak of World War II, worldwide cinema-going audience numbers dwindled, and American trading and, in effect, film releases became cut off from the European and Asian markets. As a result, Walt's second 2 features, Pinocchio and Fantasia, spectacularly bombed at the box office, with the 2 films losing close to $2 million between them, the equivalent of a $35.5 million loss in 2019. Walt is said to have been highly depressed with the failures of both films, but with deals in place with bankers and film distributor RKO, he had no option but to continue on with film production. However, Walt was tired and perhaps somewhat unmotivated to do so. For his next feature, he wanted something short and simple on which he could cut corners, make in a few months, and produce as cost effectively as possible in an effort to bring more revenue back into the studio to regain their losses. 2 years earlier, in 1939, the story of Dumbo was brought to Walt's attention by Kay Kamen, the studio's head of merchandising. The story of Dumbo was originally published as a novelty roller book, with only 8 pages of illustration and very little text, which according to animator and storyman Dick Huemer, was perhaps given away inside a cereal box. The story of Dumbo was short and sweet, and could be broken down in Huemer's words as the story of the little elephant who had big ears, was made fun of, learned to fly, and was redeemed, all in just a few panels. Walt, the visionary that he was, saw something in the story of Dumbo and set his storymen and animators up to the task of brainstorming an adaptation for the screen. Walt had originally envisioned Dumbo as a short film. However, after many story passes, including a final treatment by Huemer and Joe Grant, he realized that the only way to do the story justice was to adapt it as a feature. In fact, Huemer and Grant's final treatment was delivered to Walt across the space of 6 months in an unorthodox fashion, chapter by chapter, intriguing and exciting Walt every step of the way. The idea of Dumbo kicked around the studio for a few years without being placed in active production. But now, in late 1940, following his 2 box office failures, Walt found a safety net in the story of Dumbo. Quite simply, it fit the bill. Short, simple, cost-effective, and time-efficient, and was chosen as the studio's next picture. Walt figured he could stretch the story out to around an hour, and in doing so minimize the time it would take to animate, considering his previous 3 films ranged between an hour and a half to 2 hours. Regardless of how easily he wanted to make the picture, Walt didn't want it to look like it was made on a budget, and if he were to cut corners, he still wanted to retain the standard of Disney quality. So instead of trying to rush spectacular animation, a purposely minimalist artistic style was chosen. It would not only cut back even more time and effort, but would look great and unique. In its simplicity, the film utilized modest watercolor backgrounds with very little detail and incredibly simplistic character animation. In a further effort to cut back on the number of frames that needed to be drawn, inked, and painted, animators also took advantage of held cells in various sequences. Dumbo's simplistic style resulted in one of the few Disney features that could be considered cartoony, more in the style of Walt's shorts than his features, but it more than suited its purpose. In the words of Disney animator Eric Goldberg, Dumbo is unabashedly a cartoon and proud of it. Dumbo's production is one of the least exciting tales of Disney filmmaking, and by all accounts was pretty breezy. The only minor setback the film faced was the outbreak of the Disney animators strike in May of 1941, which would see hundreds of animators and studio staff strike against Walt in an effort for the studio to become unionized and allow better working conditions and pay for employees. Many of Disney's top animators participated in the strike, including Bill Titler, Dumbo's lead character animator. However, luckily enough, the main bulk of the film's animation had been completed, including all of Titler's work just before the strike broke out. Therefore, the strike didn't impact Dumbo as much as it probably could have, though animators from other studios chipped in to pick up some of the slack, and feeling hurt and betrayed, Walt even had certain animators caricatured as clowns in one of the film sequences.
We're gonna hit the big boss for a raise. Yes, we're gonna hit the big boss for a raise.
The strike lasted 5 weeks, with Walt finally signing union papers and bringing it to an end. While the strike achieved unionization at the studio, it did greatly impact on the feeling of camaraderie there, and the family atmosphere that Walt had always attempted to uphold had been sabotaged. Where Walt's previous 3 films had been in active production between 3 and 4 years each, Walt had Dumbo completed in less than a year, and at less than a third of the cost of Pinocchio and Fantasia. Walt delivered the final film to RKO that September, and initially, they hated it. They suggested Walt either bulk it up with more animation to make it a full-length feature, cut some animation out to make it a short, or let them release it as a B-movie. Walt vehemently disagreed with all 3 options, and he was allowed to release it as he had envisioned. Dumbo was released in cinemas in October of 1941, and even despite America joining the war effort 2 months later, the film became a box office hit as Walt had hoped, grossing over $1.6 million, the equivalent of $16 million in 2019, and making it the single most financially successful Disney feature of the 1940s. The film was critically successful as well, and Time magazine even planned to name Dumbo the Mammal of the Year on the cover of their December 29, 1941 issue. That was, of course, until the attack on Pearl Harbor called for more pressing headlines. Today, Dumbo tends to divide audiences between those who love it in all its simplicity and those who find it a strange entry in the Disney canon. The film's longevity, however, still led it to receiving a live-action remake, which released at the top of the worldwide box office in April of 2019, 71 years after the original. To me, however, Dumbo is a gorgeous little film, and in all of its simplicity manages to pull through as a uniquely sweet and enjoyable Disney feature. The reduced effort on the film's animation allowed storytellers and animators to focus harder on story and character development than they ever had before, resulting in a deeply moving and at times darkly depressing film with a strong narrative and fully established characters, all of which have their own well-fleshed arcs. Dumbo is an absolute joy to watch, and an uplifting film that reminds us all to dream big and strive for success against all odds by embracing our own individuality. Come to think of it, kind of like what Walt did with the film itself. If this is your first time viewing one of my videos, you like what you've seen, you'd like to see more like this in the future, then please don't forget to hit that big old subscribe button up on your screen right now, and also hit that like button down below if you're feeling extra generous. Also, don't forget to check out my many social media accounts, and please consider supporting me over on Patreon. Thanks for watching, guys, and I hope you have a wonderful day.